Welcome to Excel Tips and tip number 3. In this tip, we're going to talk about some good modelling practice so that you can use it while you're doing your model builds. It's best to try build from left to right and top to bottom. This is a logical format of reading a book as well as the way that Microsoft Excel calculates its formulas. That would mean that you have your data on the first sheets, your calculations in between, and then your outputs at the end. It is plausible, however, that for some management dashboards, for example, they may be at the front of the book for quick access. In the example where I've set up, you can see that I have a start date range and a heading range. I'm just going to simply go through how to set up a standard heading range that you can reuse throughout the model. Simply using an EO month formula, you can see I've dragged it out to the right hand side, creating a yearly header. I can now copy and paste this header in any sheet where I want and create a set heading for the page. And the formula will update as I go through. So, for example, if this was actually for 2011, the heading will change throughout the sheet. Another thing which is important is absolute referencing. You can quickly get to absolute referencing by using your F4 key. You can see here I've set up units, cost per unit, margin and inflation, and I'm going to do a quick calculation here. You'll see how the use of absolute referencing is critical in maintaining the link to the other workbook. So let's say in the column we want to come up with price per unit, price per units rather. So in this calculation we're going to say the number of units multiplied by the cost per unit multiplied by the inflation. So for this we're going to have to say bear with me while I write this. I like to keep it clean as possible, so when I'm on an actual sheet I'll remove the calc reference if it's been put in. For example, in this sheet where I've got calc and I put it in just to make it default, and then also multiply by the margin. You can see I've now calculated out the price per unit. The only problem is if I copy that directly across, it turns to 0 straight away. And the reason is, as I move the cells across, you'll see that changes from C9 to D9, and it's no longer captured on the data range. This is what absolute referencing is for. I can quite simply press F4 and it will add the dollar signs automatically to the area. $2 means it's fixed on that one cell. A dollar sign in front of the number means it's fixed on the row, and a dollar sign in front of the letter means it's fixed on the column. In this case, we need it fixed on both row and column, just in case that we scroll down. And we can do that for all elements except for D4. D4 is the element on this sheet here, which we want to only lock on the row. Now when we copy this across, you'll see we get a much better result. The problem with this is we have a lot of elements here in the formula. Now there's a number of ways that we can combat this. The first way, in fact, let me copy this to another row so you can see the difference. The first way would be spacing out the formula. Using Alt and Enter, I can actually move the formula to break it up into a more readable sections. In this formula, it isn't as useful as in other formulas. In some formulas which are long and complex, it is easier to break around an if statement so that you can read separate if statements. So in this instance, probably not the best tactic. Another, and probably a better way to do the formula, would actually to be breaking it out. So we can say units, cost, total cost. cost with inflation, margin, total price. Now, we can link back to units, hit our F4 to give it its absolute reference, link back to cost, hit F4 to give absolute reference. Now, we can drag this along, or we can simply do the same again here with the absolute referencing, which gives us a total cost per unit. That's flat, so let's bring that right back to the start. Now we can say cost with inflation. This is where we use that second part of the formula, which is this section in here now. So we say the current cost, absolute reference it, multiplied by 1 plus the inflation, absolute reference. Of course, we now need to escalate that over time. So we say our cell up here, where we only want to go by row, -1. Finally, we need the margin. And we're going to assume that the margin is based on the cost with inflation. So essentially we multiply that by margin. Absolute referenced again. Finally, we add the two together. That gives a much more broken out approach to the formula, and it allows for a user to quickly track back on what the calculations are. Another good way to break out each of these formulas is you can see at the moment it's very hard to distinguish what each of the components of the formula is. If I went back to the data sheet and said units as a name reference, cost as a name reference, margin as a name reference, and inflation as a name reference, I can now quickly on CalcSheet take exactly the same formula as up here. So I'll take the entire row and quickly convert this. So you want to say units multiply by cost, 1 plus inflation, and then 1 plus margin. By using a named range, it automatically puts in absolute referencing, and hence I can copy it straight across. Suddenly I have exactly the same result, but it makes it a lot easier for a person to read and understand that formula from a review perspective. That's all for this tip. We'll see you next time.